So Catelyn 7 starts with Catelyn overlooking the sunrise following the night of the previous chapter, and we find that she ruminates about the legend of Alyssa Arryn, who I believe to be a central figure in the ancient mythologies of Westeros, who is in actual fact the one who goes on to become the Night's Queen. Now, it is relayed to us that in the story of Alyssa Arryn, she saw her husband, brothers, and children all die, and she shed no tears, so the gods made her weep until her tears reached the valley, creating the Tears of Alyssa waterfall that pours down from the giant's lands of the Eyrie. And it is noted that in 6,000 years, the water has never touched the bottom of the valley, which gives us an interesting point here, as this would imply 6,000 years ago was when Alyssa Arryn was in actual fact alive and when the ancient histories took place, not 10,000 years ago, as is posited by the histories put forth by the Maesters, which I strongly believe is the case. We also learn that Jaime Lannister has begun massing forces at Casterly Rock, and that Edmure has sent riders to Tywin who have not returned, and Tywin has sent no reply, implying that they are most likely dead for even attempting to come to him. And it is also noted to us that Lord Vance and Piper guard the pass at Golden Tooth, which is interesting given that we do know that they are most notably the ones who we see with Darry at King's Landing, where they posit to Ned that the mountain has attacked their lands. And so it is interesting to see how this works out dating wise for when this is happening in relation to what is happening in King's Landing. And we also find that Brynden Tully resigns his post as the Knight of the Gate of the Vale and decides to head to Riverrun to help them in the coming battle. And after a conversation with Catelyn, he agrees to go with her by boat to White Harbour and then join the Northern host as it comes south. Now, we find that Lysa's apartments in the Eyrie contain a godswood. However, there is no weirwood present in the Eyrie godswood because weirwoods apparently cannot grow in the soil of the Eyrie, as it is basically hard rock and stone, making us see for the first time that it is possible for weirwoods to be unable to grow somewhere. And we also find that within Lysa's apartments here, there are multiple suitors who are vying for her hand in order to take control of the Vale in the name of their house. We have Eon Hunter, who, much like his name suggests, is incredibly old, so much so that he is older than what Jon Arryn was, and is crippled by gout and has 3 quarrelling sons. We also have Lyn Corbury, who is the heir to an ancient impoverished house and is very hot-headed and is presumed in certain circles to actually be gay as well. And we also have Sir Morton Winwood, who is a son of the Lady Winwood, who is widowed. Now, when Catelyn makes note of the fact that Robin needs to be taken away from Lysa in order to learn some discipline, the Maester notes that Lord Arryn intended to send the boy to Dragonstone for fostering with Stannis. However, Catelyn corrects him and says that it was Casterly Rock he was to be sent to, and that those arrangements were made after Jon Arryn's death without the consent of Lysa. However, the Maester vehemently rejects this idea, and given the conflicting accounts between the 2 potential fosterings of Robert Arryn, it seems likely that he was originally meant to be getting fostered at Casterly Rock at the pushing of Cersei in order to keep Lysa under control. However, Jon Arryn was secretly attempting to foster him with Stannis, knowing full well what was coming once Cersei's children's lineage was revealed. Now, we come to the duel, which will determine whether Tyrion is guilty or not in his trial. And interestingly enough, before the duel takes place, we have a mock duel of puppets, where 2 puppets fight to the death and one disembowels the other, which, given the location in the Eyrie, makes me think that the symbolism surrounding the fight is symbolic of the fight between Bran the Builder and his brother in the ancient times, which Catelyn also parallels with the duel between Peter Baelish and Brandon Stark, which again gives us an interesting link to Peter Baelish and his motives here, as he sees himself as a sort of fantasy hero character. And given what we saw of their battle, it was very much the small magic wielding man versus the large brutish one. And sure enough, we learn here that when Peter fought Brandon, he was cut down when he wouldn't yield. And this was the last time Catelyn saw him, as he was so grievously injured that he had to be put into recovery for a fortnight, and she was forbidden from seeing him. However, Lysa aided the Maester in his recovery. We also note that Edmure earned Baelish's disgust for being the squire to Brandon during the duel, and he could not be forgiven by him for this. And following his 2 weeks recovery, Baelish was sent to the Fingers in order to recover further, which is where he wrote Catelyn a letter which she never opened and burned, which most likely is the origins of his true motivations here, and how he became this very incel-like character that he is. It is also worth noting that Baelish spent at least 2 weeks in recovery from his wounds, and during this time it's entirely possible that he lingered so close to the edge of death that he ended up becoming a target of the three-eyed crow, explaining why in the current era he has a lot of symbolism which connects him to this bird, hence the mockingbird sigil, and would explain the potential use of magic that he uses in order to enact his plans. Now, in the actual duel that takes place in the Eyrie, we see Bronn and Sir Vardis fighting, and there is a statue in the plaza they're fighting of Alyssa Arryn, and this statue is notably made of pale white and blue veined marble. White and blue being the colours of the others, most notably the fact that Alyssa becomes the Night's Queen. And then we also get mentioned that the septon has a crystal which makes rainbows and then blesses the fight, which again ties the faith back to the ancient stories and how they covered up the true histories. Now, it is interesting as during the course of the battle, they end up cutting the statue, which may be symbolic of the fact that while the brothers were dueling in the ancient times, they actually caused injury to Alyssa Arryn herself. And then we also see that this is a battle between a knight and a common brigand or sellsword, which eventually leads to a sword being snapped, much like we see in the ancient histories of The Last Hero, and then Bronn wins by pushing the statue over, which shows us that in the ancient histories it seems likely that Bronn, who notably has a very similar name to Bran the Builder here, is showing us that Bran wins the ancient duel with his brother by toppling the Night's Queen.